Nintendo thrives on keeping beloved series and characters going over the years, which is why right now you're like, hey, it's Yoshi, and not, oh my god, what's with the up nose on that dinosaur? However, in Nintendo's 50-odd years of putting out video games, several excellent franchises have been left by the wayside, confined to gaming's history books and no longer part of the company's stable of regularly updated titles.
You just turned turbo.
Why do Nintendo no longer make these games? Well, guess what? There's no good reason. These series were great and we demand they be resurrected on Nintendo Switch. Hop to it, Nintendo. If I'm not playing New Golden Sun by Christmas, I will kick off.
If you hit the throttle right when the light turns green, you'll get a good jump off the line.
3, 2, 1, go!
You've got a turbo now.
Jet skiing is probably the only activity where the limitless strength of the ocean slams a hunk of fiberglass into your groin and you'd still call it a fun time. And no game in history has captured that fun time as capably as Wave Race, which made its first appearance on the Game Boy in 1992, having been developed in-house at Nintendo. Wave Race was notable for its skiddy jet ski controls, which made it feel like you were fighting the surface of the water, as well as the other racers on the circuit. Wave Race next returned on the N64 in a critically acclaimed demonstration of what water physics on Nintendo's first 3D console could achieve. Moreover though, it paired those bouncy wave-hopping physics with a cheerful vibe that made it seem as if jet ski riding was a way of life, man. One where you and other beautiful beach people did rad flips with dolphins, and not a thing you nearly tried once on holiday until you saw the size of the waiver they wanted you to sign. The indescribably lush Wave Race Blue Storm on the GameCube was the third and so far final game in the series, but it's hard not to feel that this soaking wet sim racer was cut down in its prime. For instance, Blue Storm had an amazing weather system that saw conditions change mid-race, and water physics that forced you to account for the shape and direction of individual waves, including the wake churned up by rival racers, if you wanted to wrangle your jet ski and punished groin over the finish line. It's hard to think of another racing series today that puts you so much in your environment, but this actually used to be something of a Nintendo specialty. Consider another abandoned series, Excitebike, with its Trials-esque motocross physics, or Nintendo-developed 1080 snowboarding, with its powdery snow and perfect sense of being dragged down a mountain by gravity. Why did Nintendo stop making these kinds of physics-heavy sports games? Well, probably because it realised it was easier just to have Princess Peach hoof a football into a goal from space. But come on, Nintendo, I demand to chase a presumably terrified dolphin through a realistic coral reef on a loud and dangerous jet boat. And if it's not in Wave Race on Switch, it'll have to be in real life. And you want that blood on your hands, Nintendo? Some games, movies and history books make large-scale military conflict look sad and pointless, which is weird because we played Advance Wars, so in fact we know it's fun and pointless and full of anime haircuts. Because who could fail to be charmed by the cartoon stylings of this turn-based strategy game, in which trendy commanding officers Andy, Max and Sammy send literally dozens of men to their deaths as the Orange Star Army clashes with rival forces in the most kawaii way possible. The game, released in 2001 for the Game Boy Advance, was the first of the Wars series to make it to the West, and thank goodness it did, because it's probably not overstating it to say Advance Wars is one of the best strategy games ever. Missions could prove fiendishly long as you vied for any advantage across varied terrain, and with all manner of different units, in a game that was easy to learn, but alarmingly deep. Little wonder that Advance Wars spawned 3 sequels, but disgracefully hasn't been seen since 2008's Days of Ruin, when the series went spectacularly off the rails by going all serious and moody, as was the style at the time. Thanks, Gears of War. You may argue that today's Switch-owning strategy fans are already catered for with a series like Fire Emblem, which is made by the same studio as the Advance Wars games, or spiritual successors like Wargroove, which showed the kind of innovation and bold thinking that always eluded Advance Wars by letting you play as a dog. But I would argue there's something particularly charming about the chunky tanks and planes rolling into battle that makes Advance Wars unique. A lovable aesthetic paired with addictive gameplay that was perfectly suited to the portable consoles it graced. Hear that, Nintendo? Perfectly suited? Portable? Okay, I worry I'm being too vague, so I'm just gonna say it. Make a new Advance Wars on the Switch, or I swear to God I will frisbee the f***ing console into a river. harder to make a case for some abandoned Nintendo series than others. For instance, do we really need a new Punch-Out when ARMS is a thing, or do we need new Pilot Wings when we could just do this all day? Whee! One series that might not be high on anyone's list is Sin and Punishment, tragically abandoned after just 2 games which came out the best part of a decade apart. Why? Because they're on-rails shooters, a genre that's all but died out today. But Nintendo is a publisher that has made its reputation on defying industry trends, and if there was one series to really roll the dice on, it's Sin and Punishment, because the game and its 2009 Wii successor are absolutely bonkers and extremely, extremely good. The plot is something to do with fighting monstrous creatures bred for food to combat a post-apocalyptic famine, and also parallel worlds.
The old Earth will die soon, killed by the very people it fed.
But even if it made sense, you wouldn't be able to follow it, because your brain will be too busy trying to shoot down monsters at the top of the screen, while also avoiding oncoming obstacles. It's exactly the kind of mind-bending trick that is incredibly satisfying to let your brain slowly master, which was probably why both games were met with critical acclaim across the board.
Get bonus!
The original, co-developed by Nintendo and Treasure, has buckets of cult status, owing to the fact that it wasn't released in the West, at least until it came to the Virtual Console in 2007, which hilariously is when the game is set. The closest we came to actual apocalypse in 2007 was when Crank That by Soulja Boy spent 7 weeks at number 1. In short, Sin and Punishment was bananas, great fun to play, and if you think modern Switch owners won't accept an on-rails shooter, just ask them how keen they'd be for a new Star Fox game. Wait a minute, when was the last Star Fox game? 2016? Wait, is Star Fox dead? Okay, if so, bring back Star Fox.
3, 2, 1,
Today's video gaming youth presumably know Captain Falcon as that unusual fellow in Smash Brothers who is almost always partially on fire. But put down the TikToks and Fortnite kids, because old man Luke is about to learn you some history. The F-Zero games are, hands down, the raddest racing games I've ever played. And I mean that scientifically, because races take place thousands of feet above the planet's surface on twisting anti-gravity courses at speeds of roughly 1,000 kilometers per hour, all set to a squealing thrash rock soundtrack. And you thought Doom Eternal was metal? F-Zero was never the only super-fast racer on the scene, simply consider the Wipeout games, but very much had its own feel, due largely to the fact that there are no weapons, but you can smash your rivals by sending your craft into an aggressive spin. And there's always something to smash, bearing in mind the mammoth 30 competitors in every race, which brings us to why F-Zero is ideal for the modern era. Simply picture the chaotic online multiplayer, especially in an updated version of the Death Race mode, in which the last racer alive wins. That's right, F-Zero Battle Royale! See kids, I told you this history lesson would pay off. And while we're planning out the next phase of the F-Zero story and thinking about Fortnite, how about the game's online mode updates seasonally to take advantage of the bizarre pro wrestling-esque rivalries and storylines between the racers?
wait, just give me one more chance.
Come on, someone back in the 90s wrote a whole load of lore for these weirdos. We can't let that go to waste.
Too bad. You lost your machine.
Nintendo isn't a company famed for RPGs, at least not ones where you don't go inside Bowser for some reason. But that needn't be the case. The House of Mario has one extremely beloved fantasy RPG in the classic turn-based mold in its back pocket that it could deploy at any moment. Golden Sun, first seen in 2001, last seen in 2010 on the Nintendo 3DS. The 3 Golden Sun games were made by Nintendo partner studio Camelot, RPG islands amid the studio's main output, an ocean of Mario sports games. But those islands were so lovely we would live on them forever, and we've seen the Animal Crossing island. That's a good island, my friend. Golden Sun had a high fantasy vibe, magic, dungeons, Final Fantasy-esque turn-based combat, the works. But distinguished itself with puzzles that you solved using the synergy spells unlocked throughout the adventure, and hilariously overblown summon attacks. I think you got him. And did we mention the original Golden Sun score, the work of Motoi Sakuraba, now best known as the Dark Souls composer, and we're going to need this battle theme fully orchestrated for Golden Sun 4. Okay, thanks, bye. This kind of game just isn't something that Nintendo makes anymore, but I reckon modern audiences would get a kick out of the colourful high fantasy style and the Djinn system, which sees you powering up your characters by collecting adorable Pokemon-esque beasties. And look, Square Enix's Octopath Traveler seems to have sold pretty well, so clearly Switch owners are keen on this kind of thing. That counts as industry analysis, Nintendo. Now you have to make new Golden Sun, or else, well, you're ignoring industry analysis and that makes you bad business people. You know what people like? Weird games. Games where you are a goose. Games where you date pigeons. Hang on, do people just like weird games about birds? Well, one series was doing weird long before it was trendy, and that's the Mother games, which you might better know as Earthbound because that's the game that had Ness in it, who's in Smash Brothers now. Describing the plot of these epic, humorous, and extremely odd RPGs is almost impossible, but you might get the vibe if I tell you Earthbound starts with hero Ness receiving an ominous warning from a bee-like creature from the future. Before setting off on an adventure that includes fighting a whole host of super odd enemies, including a scalding cup of coffee, and oh look, this is a weird bird game after all. Despite the weirdness, the Mother series has plenty of heart, with the games often cited in lists of the most heartbreaking moments in gaming. And if you're doubtful how passionate modern audiences can get about a visually basic RPG full of dorky humour, then consider A, the English fan translation of Mother 3 in 2008, one of the greatest acts of fandom ever, for which a team of enthusiasts spent thousands of hours hacking over 1,000 pages of game text, or B, Undertale, whose fans are so rabid I'm a little scared to admit Sans is my favourite skeleton, in case I incur the wrath of all the Papyrus stans. They are legion. Undertale is definitely the closest we've come to a game like Mother this decade, and the millions of sales it generated should be enough for Nintendo to see it and go, hey, we have one of those, let's make ours again, Miyamoto, my man, which I assume is how these meetings go down. Sorry to be one of the 1,000 daily reminders of this fact, but we live in troubled and frequently terrifying times, and Nintendo's function, nay duty, in this modern world is to provide us with an endless supply of chill distractions. And yes, Animal Crossing is lovely, but we need more, Nintendo, much more. These dark times call for Nintendogs. Originally released for the Nintendo DS in 2005, Nintendogs exploded your heart by entrusting you with virtual puppies and the means to keep them fed and entertained. It was a pet sim with surprising depth, but more importantly, the dogs were so freaking cute. Oh my god, I want to literally eat him so he's mine forever. Oh my god. Perhaps you consider Nintendogs to be trivial, but guess what? It's a solid gold earner. The first Nintendogs sold 24 million copies. That's the best-selling game on the DS. Nintendogs is, according to this chart, the 11th best-selling Nintendo series ever, and they only ever made 2 games. That's bigger than Yoshi, and they're still making Yoshi games. Why? With his effed up nose? The obvious solution is to follow 2011's Nintendogs plus Cats with Nintendogs plus Cats plus Yoshis for the Nintendo Switch. And then with the endless ocean of money that brings in, bring back Endless Ocean because that's the actual chillest game I ever played. For branding purposes, you could call it Nintendolphins. I'm trying to meet you halfway here, Nintendo. So, those are the abandoned Nintendo series we think need to be resurrected on Switch. Did we miss any? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this list video about games, well, wonderful news. This whole channel is basically list videos about games. A couple are on screen now, why not give them a shot? And subscribe if you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching!
Of course!